Duty, honor, country dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
The destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals.
Now, we are the masters of our fate.
Howdy, gents. Welcome back to another episode of the Wolf and Iron podcast. I'm your host, Mike Yarbrough, founder and curator of wolfandiron.com, and I'm glad you're here. Fellas, if you've been listening to the Wolf and Iron podcast for some time, let me just say thank you very much. And that sounded kind of like Elvis. Oh, thank you very much. Not intentional. If you're just tuning in for the first time, I don't typically do impressions, but maybe if by request I will do them. But welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to be speaking to you guys. It's an honor for me to speak to you guys and to be able to bring some other men's input into your lives as I interview guys, or as maybe Brandon and I do an Ask a Man podcast episode for you, whatever it is. We just appreciate so much that this is just a chance to do some good in the world. And lately, I don't know something's in the air. I don't know what's going on. But lately, I've been hearing from a number of you guys, either through emails or through contacting me on social media or through the reviews of the podcast, just saying, thanks, Mike. This is making a big difference, or this has made a big difference in my life. And I think some of it may have to do with the fact that we've done, 50, 60, maybe even close to 70 podcast episodes of some kind at this point. So there's enough out there for you guys to really kind of binge and grow. And that's exactly where we want to be. And I'm excited about just the next season of podcast and what that's going to mean for you guys. So make sure you don't miss out on anything. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and take the time to share it with another guy, because I know it's going to mean a lot to them. Now, my guest today is Dean Pohlman. He's the leader of Man Flow Yoga. So he's created this yoga program that is specifically for men, and it addresses a lot of the issues that guys have getting involved in yoga and going through it and actually benefiting from it. I've actually been in a number of yoga classes with my wife. I say with my wife because I don't think I've actually been on my own. But we've actually been involved in yoga in some kind of way for a number of years, and I always find it challenging. There's either the spiritual side of things which my wife and I don't agree with, that kind of gets introduced. Sometimes it's light. Sometimes it's sort of heavy. Sometimes it's just sort of humorous because you're like, what in the world are you talking about? Like, I'm not a tree. Light, whatever. There's that side of it that's kind of awkward. But even if you're just doing the stuff at home, sometimes trying to do the stretches and things, it just doesn't feel right. Like sometimes I walk away just feeling worse. Like I've kind of worn myself out trying to do this stuff that just didn't seem to fit for me. And so when I heard that Dean has this thing called Man Flow Yoga, where he doesn't do anything with the spiritual side, he's really just fitness focused, and that it's geared towards men, I thought this is exactly what I need. And that we really need to have him on the podcast to talk about what yoga is, to kind of reframe it in our minds. And because I know for a lot of you guys, you're listening to this and you're like, I was going to subscribe, but now that we're talking about yoga, I'm thinking differently. Look, get that mindset out of your head. Yoga is a way for us all to not be that 60, 70, 80-year-old guy that can barely walk up the stairs, that has to walk around with the walker and all that kind of stuff, is just in bad shape because he just hasn't taken care of himself. Going to the gym, lifting heavy, that's great. But anybody who does that knows you've got to have some recovery that goes beyond that. And so that's what this conversation is about, guys. I know you're going to get a lot from this. And stay tuned to the end. We've got a special promo code for any of the things that Dean's got going on with some of the membership stuff to get you kind of involved in the yoga things that he's doing. So listen to the end or fast forward because of technology. But check it out. You're going to enjoy this conversation all about yoga, particularly for guys. And here's my guest, Dean Pohlman. Mr. Dean Pohlman, thanks so much for being on the Wolf and Iron podcast. I'm excited about this conversation, man.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me, Mike.
So I think I may have told you before, I've done a bit with yoga, and my wife's big time into yoga, and she's always asking me, hey, let's go do some yoga. Let's do some deep stretch. Let's, and I've been, and sometimes I feel really good afterwards. Sometimes I just feel like I've just overdone it. And I know a lot of guys that are listening to this have either they've stayed away from it because they don't feel comfortable with the conversation around yoga, or they've tried it and, just didn't kind of seem right, or they didn't know quite what they were doing. They just didn't seem to fit for them. A lot of people show up in the class and it's easy for them, or it seems to be. And so I think a lot of the conversation is going to be really geared towards those guys that are trying to figure out, what is this thing? How do I do this as a man? And so you being Man Flow Yoga, I'm just excited about this conversation because I think it's going to help guys and me get a grasp on how can this be beneficial for us, because there are things that I know yoga would help, but I'm resistant to it. So that's where we're going to be going with this. And I just, for the guys that are maybe new to yoga, new to you, tell us what you do and how you got started with yoga.
Yeah. So my job is to help men, in particular men, but also women, understand how yoga can improve their fitness. So what I do is I create workouts, I create programs, and I try to inspire guys and inform guys how yoga can make them stronger. So it's a much more fitness focused, a much more results centric approach to doing yoga. We take out the more traditional aspects of yoga. We make it so that you don't have to be as flexible. There's more modifications for, if you're not flexible or you don't quite know what to do yet. It's all addressed from a beginner's perspective. So we're assuming that, we're addressing guys who are somewhat experienced with working out, or they may be very experienced with working out, but they just don't have a lot of exposure to yoga. So it's kind of my way of, when I started doing yoga, I loved the workout. It totally kicked my butt. I don't know if I can say ass on this, so sorry, I said butt.
You're good.
But I walked into a yoga studio on total accident.
Yeah.
I was looking for a tailor, actually, and I walked into a yoga studio. I wanted to go get my pants hemmed, and I walked into a yoga studio on accident. I was going to go to Lifetime Fitness anyways afterwards, so I decided, okay, let me try out this yoga thing. And it just completely shattered my perspectives of yoga, my prior assumptions. It was incredibly difficult. I was working muscles I didn't know I had. I was doing exercise in a totally new way, and I realized that it was because it was so difficult for me. This was something that I could easily use to get stronger. A lot of guys are resistant to yoga because they're not good at it. But when you find something you're not good at, that's a really easy way for you to get stronger. If you're doing something that you're good at and you're an expert at, you've plateaued at some point. But if you do something you're a beginner at, it's really easy. It's really easy to make substantial gains from that. So, anyways, I created Man Flow Yoga because I wanted a yoga that would appeal more to a guy like me, someone who, I played lacrosse in college, so someone who's an athlete, someone who's interested in using yoga to address those aspects of fitness that I wasn't getting from weightlifting or training, or running on the field. So for me, yoga is something that complements my fitness routine, and that's really what I try to do with Man Flow Yoga, is to teach people how to do that and how it can complement what you're already doing and make you better at the stuff you enjoy doing.
So I think that as I'm listening to this, some of the guys hear what you're saying, and I'm listening to this and going, okay, yoga for fitness, not just for flexibility. And obviously flexibility is a big part of that, but we're going to talk about the fitness side of that. And I think guys go, okay, yes, I need more flexibility. I need to be, more, I need something to complement my strength training and those kinds of things. More just in the weight room type of stuff. But, what about like the spiritual side? Because I know a lot of guys, they think, oh man, I got to go to yoga and I'm going to do these ohms and I like this. It freaks some guys out, right? They're like, I don't know what they're talking about. Do I have to pretend to be a tree? Or like, the light inside me comes alive and I don't know, touches the light. And so that's what it's not typical. Guys aren't drawn to that most of the time. How does that fit into what you do, or maybe just men and yoga in general?
Yeah, very true. So that was something that was really weird for me too. So the way that I kind of try to describe this analogy is when I was initially going to yoga studios, for the first couple months, and they were using that kind of spiritual speak, it was as if, it was really strange for me. It was like if you were going to the gym and you finished like a set of bench press, And then your spotter was like, all right, now connect with the ground. Like, what? Like, what? That makes zero sense.
Yeah.
Because movement for me has always been fitness. It's never been spiritual. But for a lot of people who do yoga, this is their first introduction into fitness. So they automatically associate movement with spirituality, because that's just kind of the speak that goes with yoga.
Yeah.
Yoga was originally a spiritual practice, and then what we know now as modern yoga is actually a combination of British gymnastics, martial arts training, and yoga. So what someone is doing today in a yoga studio is nothing what Patanjali, like the founder of yoga, I think he was around in, I can't remember what year. I want to say definitely before 1000 BC though,
yeah.
1000 AD.
Okay.
But what he was doing and what his school was doing was nothing like yoga like it's practiced today. Yoga like it's practiced today is just a bastardized, modernized version of yoga, and it's really funny to hear. I don't know. To me, it's really funny to hear yogis talk about me destroying yoga because I'm making it fitness focused. I'm like, this has nothing to do with the yoga that like you think it is. So as far as that spiritual aspect of yoga goes, I think a lot of people really enjoy it because it provides clarity, and it provides some spiritual. It provides some. So when I say spiritual, I don't necessarily mean religious. Yeah. I just mean, connecting with the universe and kind of coming to terms with your place in the world, or figuring out where your place in the world is. So there is that aspect to most yoga classes. What I do with Manflow Yoga, though, I don't do any of that. It's a workout. We use a lot of yoga postures. We integrate that with body weight exercise, depending on what the goals of the workout are, or who the workout is being made for. Yeah. But as far as integrating the spiritual aspects into it, I don't. It just doesn't. It's not. I guess to me, that's not heeding my higher call, I guess, or heeding my call. It doesn't seem authentic to me to create a yoga class where I'm, being spiritual. And that's not to say that people who practice fitness-centric yoga aren't spiritual outside of it, but for me, it's just, it's something that I practice separately from my workouts. And I think that any guy who works out can relate to that. You're not going to go to the gym and, oh man, that was a really great spiritual experience, and some people do find that when you're moving and when you're breathing and when you're integrating your body and your breath and your movement, you do feel that. But
yeah, and I think just being grateful, that's something that people can practice, whether you're at the gym and you're working out or you're running or whatever the case is, or you're doing yoga. Mm-hmm. There's some things that isn't necessarily a yoga specific thing, where I can have gratitude. I can be in the moment. I can be really thankful that I'm, able to bench what I'm able to bench, and that I'm here right now. Those are kind of things that really just mindfulness, and that kind of stuff that we should just practice anyhow. It's not a yoga specific thing. But I also thought it was interesting that you mentioned that other yogis and people are, talking about you're bastardizing the industry. And I was wondering, is there this sort of tug between the people who want to keep yoga pure, so to speak, which obviously isn't happening as what you say, versus the people who really want to move it and just focus more on the fitness side? And it sounds like there is.
Yeah. Yeah, there are. I mean, there totally is that type of people that exist. And I didn't find that type of yoga. It was weird. I looked out and I tried to find hey, there's got to be a type of yoga for athletes, or type of yoga for me. And there wasn't. And that's kind of why I started Manflow Yoga. I really had no experience in entrepreneurship or any desire to do that. Yeah. But it was just seemed like, well, I like working out. I like yoga. I think this could be a great, I'll start it as kind of like a side thing just to try and help guys get more into yoga. And then eventually I found myself without a job, and I was like, well, I've got this Facebook page and this YouTube channel. Let's see what I can do with this.
So for the guys that are new to yoga and they're just kind of getting started and they're thinking, okay, maybe I want to go check out this Manflow Yoga and see what it's all about. what are the problems we're trying to fix that that men are having through? We're just going to the gym, we're working out, maybe we're doing a good routine. We got back, we got chest, we got legs. We do some pre-stretching, some warm-ups and stuff like that before. We're not tearing anything. But what are we trying to fix for guys that yoga is going to fix, that just going to the weight room, doing some warm-ups and stuff like that is not going to get done?
Yeah, so there are just certain movements that I've experienced in yoga and that you'll find in yoga that are just totally different from what you're going to do in a weight room. In a weight room, you're doing reps. You're doing things rather quickly. I mean, even if you're doing a slow rep, it's still, 5 seconds, 6 seconds, maybe 10 seconds at most. But in yoga, what you're doing is you're slowing things down, and you're holding postures. I think that's when yoga is most effective, when you're holding postures for, a minimum of 30 seconds, 40, 50, 60, 90 seconds. That's when you really that's when the difference really presents itself. If you're doing yoga and you're just moving from one pose to the next every 5 seconds, you could just do that with another workout, and you could probably do it more efficiently because you've got weight behind it. So it's going to be more efficient. But when yoga is really beneficial, it's when it's moving really slowly and you're holding those postures. And while you're holding those postures, you're able to do things that you're not able to do while you're lifting. You're able to tune into your muscle awareness. You're able to build that body-mind connection. And if you want to say that another way, muscle activation. Most guys have huge issues when it comes to using commonly neglected muscle groups. So their glutes, their abs, their transverse abdominals, vastus medialis, some muscles on your thighs, upper back, scapular stability, so your rhomboids. So there's a lot of muscles that are just totally inactive when you're working out. And a lot of guys are familiar with this because they've experienced it in the form of knee pain or shoulder pain or lower back pain. And those are all symptoms of you not using your body correctly. Those are symptoms of those muscles not activating. When you aren't using your glutes, when you're not using your hips, that means that the weight shifts into your knees. And that's why people have knee pain during workout. And a lot of people will associate, it just hurts a little when I work out, or it's no pain, no gain, right? But exercise shouldn't hurt. Exercise, it should be tough. Yeah, you should definitely push yourself. But, for the most part, you shouldn't be in pain when you're working out. And a lot of guys will, I'm a man and I push through my workout. It's like, cool. Well, you're now 35 and you can't lift your arms overhead, dumbass. Right. There's a difference between training intelligently and training hard. You can do both. But if you don't have that proper muscle activation, then you've got these imbalances that are causing problems in your body. The other aspect of this is mobility. So we are not active for the most part. I'm assuming that the guys listening to this podcast, as you're on your morning commute to wherever, you're probably going to be sitting at a desk. And, when you sit at a desk all day, even if you're just sitting half a day, your body is getting tight. Your hips are getting inactive. The hips are getting tight. You've got poor posture. Your shoulders are rounded forward. Your arms are out in front of you. And this leads to it's a hugely negative impact on your flexibility and your mobility. And so we sit at a desk for, 8 hours, and then we go out and we're like, all right, now I'm going to work out. But your body still thinks it's at a desk. You still have those tight muscles. You still have those imbalances. You still have that poor posture. And that also increases your risk of injury. So when it comes to your exercise program, you have to do something to undo that stress of sitting at a desk. You can't expect to go into a workout and just function, the way that your body's supposed to. You have to do something to restore that mobility that was lost. So from one aspect of mobility, it's the sedentary lifestyle that's killing your mobility. But the second part of that is, we're all getting older, and you can't do the same workouts that you were doing when you're 20 because you just start to lose mobility. Muscles tighten up. If you don't use it, you lose it. And we have no record of this, but prior to prior to modern society, prior to the Industrial Revolution, people didn't really have these issues. They didn't have back pain. And when you look at more traditional societies, you look at people who can easily sit down in a squat and stay there like for hours. Like that's just how they sit. And you ask most guys to sit in a squat, and they maybe their hips get below their knees, maybe not. And then if you ask them to stay there for a minute, they're like, all right, I can tough it out. But I'm like, well, do 10 minutes. They're looking at you like, absolutely not. I can't do that. So, in order for us to function well, in order for us to exercise well, we have to address our mobility. So those are some key aspects: that muscle activation, that body awareness, that the mobility aspects, and then finally the focus on breath, because most guys don't focus on their breathing. And the cool thing about when you work on your breath is that it translates not just into your fitness and your weight and your weightlifting and your other workouts, but you're also able to recognize your breathing and be conscious of it throughout the day. So when you're in a stressful situation, you realize, oh shit, I'm not breathing. Like my chest is totally drawn in. I'm constricted. I've got really shallow breathing right now. And you can say to yourself, okay, deep breath, just like I was doing a yoga workout. And that allows you to manage your stress better. It allows you to manage your anxiety. And, a lot of guys will say, oh, whatever. I'm stressed and I'm a man, I'll handle it. But you're a better man when you're a better man when you're less stressed. You're more creative. You have higher testosterone. There's just there's no reason to want to be stressed or to be high strung. I find it really interesting that a lot of concepts that we have as men of what like the ideal man is actually are totally detrimental to what men use to measure their masculinity most, which is their testosterone or their fitness. And guys who are who aren't working out well and who aren't sleeping and minimizing their sleep and are not managing stress have really have lower testosterone levels, and they have just lower health levels in general. So anyway, so that was a very long answer to your question, but mobility, body, mind awareness, muscle activation, and breath awareness are some of the biggest benefits that you will get from yoga, and they'll make you better at everything that you do physically.
And I think you're right about what you said about guys that get the sort of the typical stoic mindset of men, and I mean stoicism to the extreme kind of mindset where it's, I'm going to tough it out. I'm going to hide my feelings. I'm not going to breathe about through my problems. I'm just going to huff off in a storm or whatever. Those guys, you got high blood pressure, high cholesterol, hypertension. You got so many issues that really do lead to an early grave. And I think that there is something about, like I said, being mindful, focusing on your breath, and slowing down some things. That really does help. Like you said, it helps us to be better men. What do you know if there's a connection between yoga and testosterone? In terms of increased testosterone versus, say, like the guy who just goes to the gym and just kills it on leg day type of stuff?
Yeah. So I've seen studies that compare people who do yoga to people who aren't exercising at all.
Okay.
And this is this was a Russian study done in the 80s. You can find it cited in The Science of Yoga, which is a really cool book if you're interested in learning about kind of the science and the myths and the actual facts behind yoga. It's called The Science of Yoga by William J. Broad. So, compared to people who aren't exercising, yoga was shown to have significantly higher testosterone levels. Compared to people who are exercising, I'm not sure if I've seen anything for that, but just from the indirect benefits that yoga provides, the stress relief management, better sleep. Sleep is huge for testosterone. If you're not sleeping if you're not sleeping 7.5 hours a night, and that means 7.5 hours of when you're actually asleep. Now, so not setting aside 7.5 hours to sleep, but setting aside 8.5 hours to sleep and spending 7.5 of those hours actually in sleep. But if you're not sleeping, you're going to have lower testosterone levels. If you're not managing stress, lower testosterone. If you're shallow breathing throughout the day and you have high anxiety, lower testosterone. And those are things that you're going to get from a traditional weightlifting workout. Not to mention that if you're not complementing your strength training, if you're not doing recovery work and lengthening your muscles and just strengthening your body in different ways, you're not going to be as effective in the weight room. You're going to be at a higher risk of injury because of overtraining. I think that a lot of guys, especially the Marine, but I'm just trying to think of like a couple of guys who I've worked with. They're like, it's ingrained on a cellular level that they have to do these intense workouts every day. Yep. And your body can't recover that quickly. Right. So if you were to spend, instead of lifting 5 days a week, if you spent 3 days lifting and 2 days doing yoga instead, you'd be way stronger than the guys who are doing lifting 5 times a week. And unless you're a professional athlete, there's really no reason why you need to be doing that much.
And I talk to guys who are in the gym all the time, and they eventually reach a point where they're just like, I just hurt. Like my body just hurts all the time. Like I'm doing the things that I think I'm supposed to be doing. I got my diet down. I'm drinking water like crazy. But truth be told, I just don't feel good. I'm just aching all the time. And that, once again, that level of inflammation that your body's always under, if you don't give it that chance to recover, then your cortisol levels go up to put out the inflammation. Your testosterone levels go down. That decreases your ability to put on muscle, burn fat, feel good, feel like a man, those kinds of things. So you've definitely got to have that downtime. And I think yoga is a great way of doing that.
And that awareness aspect that I discussed, you won't notice that. Like a lot of guys don't have that awareness. They don't develop it. And yoga really helps to develop that awareness of, oh shit, my body doesn't feel good, or my knee really doesn't feel good here. Or, noticing your body throughout the day instead of only when you work out. So.
And, it's different, especially if you do hot yoga or something like that, where it's you go in, you're stretching, you're doing all your stuff, man, you come out just feeling like so limber and cleansed. Even if you don't know what you're doing, you still do feel a lot better. And that's a different experience than going to the gym and, just killing it. And because you feel better, you just, you want to go on with your day, your mind's clear. I think both can be good, like you said, but it's a different experience. I think we need that. And especially for the guys who are listening to this, if you're like me, if you're in your 30s or in your 40s and you're already tight in some areas, you can't touch your toes, you can't hold a squat for very long, you can't do a deep squat, you don't have a lot of mobility in your chest, to kind of open up. If that's where we are now, where are we going to be when we're 60 and 70 years old?
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
It's not going to get any better. We're going to be that guy that's walking with the walker and he's all hunched over and he can't stand up, and or he's he's afraid of going up and down the stairs alone in case he might fall. That we don't want to be in that, and we don't have to be that in that case.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's so much to be said for being proactive with your fitness. That the older you get, the harder it is to increase your mobility. And everyone that I've spoken with who is, 30s, 40s, 50s, we even got some guys with 60s and 70s doing this stuff. They all say like, oh, wow, I wish I'd started doing this sooner. I feel so much better.
Yeah. Yep. Let's talk about breathing, because I think this is something that we could give some guys some how-tos over the call.
Yeah.
Moves and stuff would be challenging, but how do we breathe properly? What's the right way to go about that?
So the easiest way to practice this is to first just lay down on the ground, lay down on your back, bend your knees, and just plant your feet on the ground so you're relaxed.
Yeah.
Bring your hand on top of your stomach, and you can do this in a seated position as well. It just won't work as well. And as you inhale, pretend like you're kind of sipping through a straw. You can also do it through the nose, but you want to expand your belly as much as you can. So you're pushing your belly out, you're inhaling, you're bringing in as much air as possible. And then as you're exhaling, you're squeezing your abs, pulling your belly button toward your spine, pushing out all the air, maintaining your posture as you're doing it. So you don't want to squeeze out all the air and get in really tight and bring your shoulders down and in, but you're just tightening your abs and squeezing all the air out, pulling your belly button to your spine. And the easiest way to practice that is to just start with, 4 seconds in, maybe a 1 second pause, 4 seconds out, and then going to 5 seconds in, and then 5 seconds out. But as you're doing that, you're maintaining your posture. So you don't want to arch your back as you're inhaling. A lot of people think that when you're inhaling, you're supposed to arch your back and really open up your chest.
Yeah.
But you want to stay in a neutral position with your torso. So your shoulders are still pulled down and back. Your chest is open, but you're not like puffing your chest out. They're neutral. And you also want to avoid bringing the shoulders in or collapsing through your chest. It helps to think pulling your ribs away from your hips. So getting length from, in your lower torso, making that area from your pubic bone to your sternum as long as possible. And then again, just going through that breathing of inhaling, expanding your belly, breathing in as much air as possible. And then when you get to that top of that breath, just slowly exhaling. So it's not a fast exhale. You're not just trying to squeeze all the air out as quickly as possible. It's a slow, controlled exhale, getting all the air out, pulling belly button to spine.
So does it matter when you're breathing out if it's through the nose or through the mouth?
There's a lot of, I'm going to say that it's better to breathe through the nose.
Okay.
There's a big trend going on right now. I don't think it will be a trend. Actually, I think it's a trend that'll stick around, but it's nasal breathing. And actually yoga is really big on nasal breathing. So even before this started, I was teaching people, hey, don't breathe in through your nose. Don't breathe in through your mouth. Make sure that you're breathing in through your nose. And one of the main reasons for that is that breathing through your nose allows you to stay in that rest and digest mode, or kind of avoid going into that fight or flight mode. So it helps you control your nervous system better by breathing through your nose, and not, for whatever reason, breathing through your mouth makes you more stressed. So you want to try and do it through your nose.
Well, and there's something too about how, our bodies the things that our bodies do can kind of kick off something in our brain to say, oh, we're stressed right now, or, oh no, we're actually in a, kind of a peaceful state and everything's calm right now. And so I think we can trigger that. If you think about it, if you're really trying to huff and puff and get out of a situation, you're going to be breathing through your mouth because you need oxygen really quickly. You're trying to take in as much as you can. But if you're calm and you're relaxed, you should be, breathing in and out through your nose. It's interesting that you say that because Eugen Sandow, who was the father of bodybuilding, is like one of the first guys to really he's actually the statue of Mr. Olympia that they give out to all the Mr. Olympia.
Oh yeah.
He's the statue. And he basically went to Rome and measured the Davids and the different Michelangelo statues, and then said, I'm going to work my body out to reach these proportions. And so he's the first bodybuilder. And and he wrote a couple of books. Really, really smart guy. Before there was any hype, before there were any steroids and all this other kind of stuff. He's got an amazing physique. But he wrote a couple of books, and one of the things that he talks about in there is nasal breathing. And his mindset was that when you breathe in through the nose, it warms the breath before it gets into the lungs. And then when you exhale through the nose, it also, because it creates that, it's a smaller area that it can go through, it allows the oxygen to be absorbed more by the lungs before it comes, back out. And so, he didn't know yoga and that kind of stuff. I mean, he wasn't into any of those kinds of things, but just common sense. He studied the physique and the body and how it works. And his whole thing was, you should breathe in and out through the nose as much as possible during exercise because blood flow is important. Oxygen to the blood is important. And so I could see that being helpful. And it's just interesting how that is just crossed over.
It makes total sense. And a lot of, what you're saying is, he said he didn't know yoga, but, we call it yoga, but so much of yoga is other types of fitness. Exactly. So much of yoga is, we call it in yoga. I don't use any of the Sanskrit names in yoga because I just assume that my audience doesn't speak Sanskrit. So I use English. Yeah. Call me crazy. But in yoga, we call it a chaturanga, or like there's no translation, but I call it a yoga push-up. Okay. So, I call it, yogis call it a chaturanga. We call it a push-up. You call it a push-up. I mean, there's so many different names for these movements that are essentially the same with if you take away the little variations in each, or the little differences in each, but it's all movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of movement, I want to talk about active versus passive range of motion. As I think about mobility, I want to get our minds around what these are, and just give us some explanations of what that means, and then also we'll dive into how to increase our range of motion.
Cool. I'll give you two examples. Okay. So I'll give you a lower body and an upper body example. So lower body example would be me lifting my leg up in front of me. So keeping my whatever standing leg I'm on, I'm going to keep that leg straight. So I'm standing my right leg. I'm going to lift my left leg up, and then I'm going to grab my left toes, bend that knee as much as I need to so I can grab my toe. And then I'm going to extend that leg forward and lift that leg up as high as I possibly can. That's passive, because I'm using my arm to work into that range of motion, or to work into that mobility. Now, if I remove my arm from the equation and I lift my leg only using the strength of my leg, right? So I've got no hand. Mm-hmm. My hand is just at my side. I'm standing on my right leg. My right leg is straight, and my left leg is totally extended, and I'm just lifting my toes up as high as possible. Super slow, not using momentum to get there, but just slowly lifting it up. That's active mobility.
Okay.
The difference between the two is passive flexibility is stretching. Passive flexibility lengthens the muscle tissue. It's great. It's great to do. It's helpful. It helps your muscles recover. It will increase your overall mobility to some extent. But with passive flexibility, it tends to go away. So it's kind of like rolling, right? Or rolling, or like foam rolling, or using lacrosse balls.
Yeah.
You can do it, the day of. Maybe you do it before a workout, and you're like, okay, now I've got all this flexibility, right? But then the next day, you're like, you do it again, and it's not there anymore, right? Maybe there's a little bit of it left, but for the most part, you've kind of tightened up. And unless you keep doing that over and over and over again, you won't have that flexibility. The difference when you practice active mobility is that you don't need warm up to get there. Your body can go into that because you've developed strength there. So it's much more effective to practice active mobility. Increasing your active mobility leads to an increase in overall passive flexibility, while increasing your passive flexibility does not necessarily lead to increased active mobility.
Okay, that makes total sense. Yeah, that's good.
So your upper body example then is, let's say you do a stretch on the wall. All right, so let's say you put both hands against the wall, you bring your chest toward the ground, and your arms are kind of on either side of your ears, or maybe they're above your ears. That's a passive stretch for your shoulders. But if we take the wall out of the equation and you bring your arms straight overhead, you keep your chest neutral so you don't arch your back at all, and then you squeeze your arms as far back as possible. Now we're not just stretching, we're also building strength. So we're stretching the muscles in the front of your body, and we're strengthening the muscles in the back of your body. So active mobility is accompanied by strengthening, whereas passive flexibility is just lengthening of the muscle.
So when we do passive, or when we do yoga, we're kind of integrating both. I mean, we're doing some stuff that's just passive, but then we're also kind of going back and saying, "Oh, now let's do this actively as well," right? Or is it all active?
I would say for the most part in yoga, it's mostly passive.
Okay.
There are very few yoga classes that I've been to where the emphasis has been on active mobility. So, in the way that most people practice it, it is kind of focused on passive flexibility. So there are some poses that do involve active range of motion, but for the most part, in yoga, the way that traditional yoga is practiced, you're going to be focusing on passive flexibility, unless the instructor does something, atypical. So what I try to do with manful yoga is I make the postures more active. I make it focused on active mobility. So, instead of working on, let's just say we get into a specific type of lunge, instead of sinking into a lunge and just letting our body sink as far as possible into it, which would be passive, I tell people to, okay, now you're deep into this lunge. Now I want you to pretend like you're going to move your leg here. You're going to lift your leg up, or you're going to move it somehow. And then it shifts. Now you're working on active mobility. You're working on developing strength in that end range of motion. And it's a totally different feeling than passive flexibility.
So when I think about this, the first thing that comes to mind is when I was a kid, I was in Taekwondo. And I could kick high, I could do all the kind of cool stuff. I could do the thing where you kind of bring your leg up and you just kick straight out in front of you and hold it there for a little bit, while you're balanced on one leg. Obviously,
nice.
that kind of stuff went away as I got older. But I do remember it being different than just feeling like I was stretched out, right? Like I actually had the ability to kind of hold my body in a position for a period of time and do some neat things. And Taekwondo is all based around kicks and stuff like that. So it's mostly like it's things to do with your legs. But I just think about like now as an adult, and I know some of this is because I'm older, but a lot of guys, we get tight in our hamstrings, we get tight in our chest, and we'll go roll those things out. We'll go stretch, and it'll feel better for like that day, like you said. But the next day we wake up and we're tight again, and it's like, man, how do I get past this point of constantly being tight in these areas? And actually get them fully, actually stretched out and to a place where it doesn't just lapse back the next day. And what you're saying is that the yoga, especially in the way that you do it, the active range of motion and the active movements are really what we're looking for.
Yeah, you have to develop strength and range of motion for it to. You can get away with, passive stretching will get you somewhere. Practicing passive flexibility, it will improve your mobility. But working on your active mobility is just so much more effective that there's no reason not to do that. And that leads to another issue with working on passive flexibility is that if you're an athlete and you're training passive flexibility, that can actually make your joints more susceptible to injury. That's not to say that you shouldn't be doing passive stretching, because athletes need recovery. The day after a game or a particularly intense workout, you should definitely be doing stretching. But if your yoga practice only consists of passive flexibility, that's not going to lead to improvements in performance. It's not going to translate to your other workouts. And
obviously, so many athletic trainers and stuff like that are adopting yoga and these types of practices now, which is kind of funny because if we look back at the Romans and how their gladiators would train, for events and things like that, they would actually go basically do some kind of fitness type of stuff. I want to say lift weights, but they would do some kind of exercise stuff that was pretty intense. Then they'd
lift
go
stones.
Lift stones and those kinds of things to train for the games. Then they would go and get massaged for like an hour. And then they'd go sit in a hot bath, for a while, and then they would do some stretching and things like that. So there's a lot of things that, as in Western culture, we've just kind of lost just to kind of probably just for the sake of getting stuff to, just come to the gym and just get, that's all you need. But really, we need a lot more than that. And and so I think these aren't new ideas necessarily, but they are kind of making a comeback. I think that's good.
I totally agree.
For the guys that are listening to this and going, okay, Mike, I know I need to do yoga, but every time I try to do this type of stuff, I just feel out of place. I don't have enough flexibility to even, look right in the class that I'm in, or I just feel like I can't do any of the positions, hold any of the moves. I'm just so inflexible. I'm out of shape. I don't know where to start. Where do those guys begin so that they can get to a point where they feel comfortable, whether they're attending a class or they're doing it on their own? How do they jump into this thing?
So the first thing I would say is no one gives a damn that you are inflexible. So, there's no need to feel self-conscious when you're going to a yoga studio. Everyone is so focused on themselves and not trying to fart or whatever it is, or trying to pretend like they know how to do the pose, that they don't care. They're not looking around and saying like, oh, wow, that person's like inflexible. I would actually respect the guy who's there and doing his best more so than, the person who's being a judgmental asshole, for sure. Yep. So that's the first thing I would say. But it really comes down to the instructor. So if you don't find an instructor that you jive with, that you can relate to, and who understands the proper modifications for you, if you don't have, if you're not as flexible as a yoga instructor, then it's not going to work out. So there are some classes that you will go to and you're just going to feel, out of place, and the instructor won't be able to help you, either because he or she doesn't have experience with people who have your body type, or, and this is really more often, this is the case, or there's just too many people in the class and he or she can't get around to adjusting everybody in the class.
Right.
So I think it's important that you find an instructor that understands what you're going through, and that gives you the necessary modifications, so that instead of doing, a forward fold, which is when you reach down and touch your toes, instead of doing that with your legs straight, they would say, okay, bend your knees, use a block, rest your hands on the block so you don't have to bring your hands all the way to the ground, or, bring your hands to your shins or something like that. So part of it is it's a lot of it comes down to whether or not the instructor is speaking to you. And the other part is making sure that you do the stretch for your body. So you don't want to go into a yoga studio or look at a yoga video online and just try to imitate what the person there is doing. Your goal should be to feel the stretch the way that it's supposed to be experienced. What I mean by that is you should be feeling a stretch in the right areas. You should be feeling the muscles engaging in the correct areas. Your spine should be aligned a proper way. And that comes down to just listening and learning and understanding the technique. So it's also very important that you find an instructor who gives you proper technique. And if you don't get that proper technique and you're just going into a yoga studio and there's someone walking around, there's a yoga instructor walking around and, talking about all of your troubles and your stress melting away, but just saying, okay, do this one pose, now do this next pose, and not telling you how to do the pose, then that's obviously not going to help you. So
that's good. That's good information, because I know that's where a lot of guys get hung up, is I'm going to go here, I'm going to fill out a place, I don't know if this is something I want to do. But guys, let me just tell you what, it's a great date idea. You're going to score some serious, man points for taking your lady out to, or just if she already goes, go into a yoga class with her. My wife is actually doing a deep stretch class once a week, not too far from where we work. And she's invited me a few times, and I've said, I got some work to do here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. But I think you've changed my mind on it. So I'm going to take it up. And I'm going to report back to you guys who are listening in on how this whole yoga thing is going for me, knowing that I'm not going to be starting at the same level that where Dean is, or probably most of the people in the class are, but just going in kind of armed with a little bit of this information. Mm-hmm. Dean,
yeah. Can I give some quick tips on being the guy in the yoga studio?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, don't draw attention to yourself as the inflexible guy. Like it's not funny when the instructor says touch your toes and you try to be the funny guy and you say like, what am I supposed to do? Or like you say like, oh man, or you go and you're like, oh man, I drank so much last night, I'm going to sweat so much and this is going to be so tough. Like, don't be that asshole.
Don't be that guy, yeah.
But that's I guess those are my main tips. There's people who are going, there are some people who are inevitably going to think like, oh, this guy's here just to pick up chicks. But for the most part, the women there don't think that. They're going to respect you for just being there and doing your best. But just focus on yourself, look around if you need help with technique. You can do that in a way that's not creepy. But I think that for the most part, women are now, and also there's way more men doing yoga. Yeah. 20 years ago, I don't know what population of people attending yoga studios were actually men, but the number is really high now. It's like 1 in 4 guys who are going to a yoga class, or 1 in 4 people going to a yoga class are men. So, they're used to you being there now. It's not weird. Just go and do your best, listen to the instruction. And even don't be afraid to ask people questions.
Yeah, that's really good. And even afterwards too, that's a great way to strike up conversation. Hey, with the trainer or with other people maybe there that you've that from around town or church or wherever it happens to be. Definitely ask questions there. I'm thinking too about the things that annoy me with yoga. I have this issue with people that breathe really, really heavily, or they make a lot of noise. Just not when it's called for.
Yep,
you know who you are if you're listening to this, or maybe you don't, but you should be aware of that. Yeah, you don't. You basically don't try to draw attention to yourself because one of the things I enjoy about it is that it is kind of quiet, it's peaceful in most cases, and it kind of being mindful. So
the equivalent of breathing loudly is the equivalent of the guy who's loading up way more weight than he can actually do on a squat rack and then making a ton of noise about it.
Yeah, right. To draw attention to himself. Look at me.
Yeah. I've been to some studios where, in particular neighborhoods, where it's like the ritzy neighborhood of where I'm from Cleveland, so this would be I won't name them because I don't want to alienate anybody, but I've been to some studios where it's like, it's definitely the upper class crowd and they're there to breathe loudly and be noticed. And you're like, what are you doing? Shut up. It's very, very weird.
And I guess if you fart in yoga, especially hot yoga, don't own it. Just let it linger. Because you'll always be that guy. And if you are the only guy in there, they'll think it's you anyhow. So.
They probably will. That's true.
Yeah. So there's some drawbacks to being a guy, but it's okay. All right. Well, let me just end on this note. I did want to just give you a chance to give a shout out on anything that you've got going on that you want to draw guys' attention to. Obviously, you got Manflow Yoga is out there, but anything special happening?
Yeah. So I just put out a book a few months ago, published by Dorling Kindersley. They're kind of the publishers the book publishers that do how-to books. The book is called Yoga Fitness for Men. It was featured in Men's Health. It was featured in Muscle and Fitness, May 2018 magazine. It was a number one it was a number one new release in 4 different categories on Amazon. And it's currently somewhere hanging around the 20s in terms of its ranking. But that's a really awesome book for getting started with yoga, especially to help you learn the postures and understand. There are different sections for each posture telling you what you should feel, what you shouldn't feel, giving you technique points, telling you the benefits, the target areas. And it's a pretty in-depth technique. So it means that it allows you to learn yoga way more effectively than if you were going to a yoga studio and things are moving quickly. And problem with yoga studios, they just don't give a lot of instruction because the fitness or the focus is more on the experience and not on making sure everyone's doing the postures correctly. So if you're looking to start yoga and learn the postures, my book is out. I would highly recommend that. And then if you're looking for actual yoga workouts and actual programs, my website has tons of different programs for guys. We just put out a burnout recovery program. So this is for those guys who, like we were talking before, have done way too much exercise and everything hurts. Mm-hmm. So we have something for those guys. We've got something for weight training and for resistance training. So something to complement it. Something to help you recover from it. There's running performance workouts. There are programs to increase your flexibility. There are general programs to just teach you yoga in general. So there's a ton of stuff on there. And I think we'll be doing, we're recording it, so we are doing it. So we'll be doing we'll do like a promo code for you guys. Just type in Wolf and Iron.
Awesome.
And I'll give you the link and you can share that with your tribe. But yeah, we'll give you guys 20% off on any plan.
That's awesome, man. And congratulations on the book too.
Thank you.
It definitely sounds like it's right up where guys need more instruction and stuff. Because one of the things that's a challenge is that we go into a yoga, a studio or whatever, and we start doing this stuff and we're like, how much is this supposed to hurt? What am I supposed to be feeling right now? And nobody, they'll tell you things like it's, you're supposed to feel a gentle stretch. Well, I don't know what that means. Like what's on a scale of like 1 to, I'm ripping my my ligaments out. Where does where am I on this scale? So I think that kind of stuff, and just having some pre-knowledge before you go in, like, what am I doing here, is really going to be helpful.
Yeah. My videos are really focused on that. So we try to, I say, and I actually give specific intensities. So I'll say, like, doing this, you should feel somewhere intensity around like a 4 or 5 or a 4 or 5 or a 6 out of 10.
Okay.
And it's the lessons are very instructive. So you're always hearing what the proper technique is supposed to be, and where you're supposed to be feeling it, and how you can improve, or how you can, make it take the next step. So I don't want to plug myself too much, but I just want to reassure guys that it's this is kind of addressing what I really do with this. Is I try to address those main concerns of guys. And what people say over and over is that what's really helpful is that you're so focused on the technique. And it's interesting because we don't know how to say that to people, because they don't know that they're looking for it yet.
Yeah, right.
But when they hear it, then they're like, oh, this is what I need.
Yep.
So
exactly right. And I think that's what I'm getting from a lot of this conversation. I know the guys listening to this are as well. And fellas, you can find out more about Dean and Manflow Yoga by heading over to wolfendiron.com/manflowyoga. That's /manflowyoga. Do that now and get connected with what Dean's got going on. There'll be links out there for the promo code, links to his book, and things like that. And a lot of you guys I know are listening to this and going, this is exactly what I need. I need to stop putting this off, thinking that, well, yoga is not for guys, it's for ladies, whatever, and actually get into doing some of this stuff. And I'd love to hear, and I know Dean would love to hear about, what kind of impact yoga's had on your just overall fitness, your health, just the way you feel throughout the day, those kinds of things. And so be sure to connect with us over there. Once again, that's wolfendiron.com/manflowyoga. And Dean, this has been a great conversation, man. I really do appreciate you being on the podcast. I know guys are getting a lot from this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I forgot to mention one more thing.
Sure,
so if you buy the book and you send your order confirmation to help@manflowyoga.com, we've got a bunch of video routines that we filmed specifically for the book. And so if you send that order confirmation, so just like the email or the book itself or whatever, we'll send you those bonus video routines so you can have something to use with the book.
Yeah, it's great because seeing it's, there's one thing to read it, there's another thing to see it. And so that's awesome. It sounds like you guys got so much good stuff going on over there.
Yeah, we make too much content. It's a complaint. People will say there's too much content. I don't know what to do. Like, well, this is a good problem to have.
It is. It really is a good problem to have. And that means that you're really passionate about the subject and you know a lot about it, and you're excited about getting other people involved in it as well. So that's good.
Thank you.
All right, man. Well, maybe we'll have you on here again down the road once I'm all stretched out and flexible and I've got some good news to report. But once again, thanks for being on.
Yeah, it takes usually 3 months is where you okay, now I'm noticing some big differences. And within 1 month, you'll say, okay, I'm feeling a lot better. So 1 to 3 months, you should feel it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Thanks again for having me. Yeah.
Well, there you have it, men. I'd love to know what you thought about the episode. Feel free to reach out to me on any of my social media networks. And look, if you got something out of this, make sure another guy does too. Share the episode and make sure it gets in front of the guys that need to hear it the most. Until next time, keep your powder dry, and may a fair wind be always in your sails.